Hello, MountainCare. Today we're going to learn about old cars. This presentation will cover everything from classic cars to antique cars to vintage cars. For men, sometimes cars are a lifelong passion. You play with them, play with model cars as a kid, look forward to getting your first car as a teenager, then rebuild motors and redo them, repair them. Then a lot of times right on into adulthood, you tinker with them, having to maintain them. And for a lot of folks, they become a hobby. It's very popular to collect cars now. For you ladies, maybe cars are not quite your thing. Maybe you're not as passionate about cars as maybe the men are. But maybe these videos and images will bring back some happy memories. Maybe your first car, your first date, your marriage, your parents. Let's learn about old cars. So what's the difference between classic, antique, and vintage cars? Usually the classic car moniker applies to vehicles over 20 years old. Antique cars are 45 years old or over, and vintage cars are built between 1919 and 1930. Who made the first car? The Carl Benz patent motor wagon, or motor car, built in 1885, is widely regarded as the first automobile. The vehicle was awarded the German patent number 37435, which Benz applied for on January 29, 1886, a long time ago. Bicycle mechanics J. Frank and Charles Duryea of Springfield, Massachusetts, designed the first successful American gasoline automobile in 1893. They won the first American car race in 1895 and went on to make the first sale of an American-made gasoline car the next year in 1896. But it was Henry Ford who was the first to mass-produce an automobile that was affordable to middle-class America. The Ford Motor Company still endures today as a leader in the automotive industry. And when most of us think of the first car, oftentimes it's the Ford Model T that we have in mind.
So this is my number one car, Ford's Model T. First built in 1908. It really is the beginning of everything the modern motor car has. Unfortunately, there is one thing that you've got on your car that I haven't on this, and that's an electric start. So before I go and drive it, I've got to get it going.
Give me that swing. 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 Give me that swing.
You would have thought it's going to be really uncomfortable, but it isn't. Model T is really a soft riding car. It steers well too. There's not much free play in this system. Ford look after this car well, but this is how they were when they were new. And frankly, once you've learnt the pedal layout and the control system, it's a cinch to drive. It's really rather good fun, actually. This car is 120 years old, and the important thing to remember about the Model T is it brought motoring to the masses for the first time. The technology embedded in this car is still represented in the hatchback parked outside your house today. What a legacy that is. For me, there's three bits of genius about the Model T. The first 1950s, Henry Ford designed a strong, reliable car that just about anyone could learn to drive after a couple of lessons. The other thing is he secured his supplies up and down the supply chain. So he bought forests, for instance, for wood, for the frames, the wheels, the seats, and even the steering wheels. He bought mines to secure his steels for the chassis rails and the engine parts. The other thing is he really understood marketing. He priced this car really cleverly so that not only his workers, but also the general public could afford to buy one. What a clever man he was.
Henry Ford and the Big Three. Even though the automobile was first invented and perfected in Germany and France in the late 1800s, Americans quickly came to dominate the automotive industry in the first half of the 20th century. Henry Ford innovated mass production techniques that made the Model T affordable to middle-class Americans. And Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler emerged as the Big Three auto companies by the 1920s. The Model T Runabout sold for $575 in 1912, less than the average annual wage in the United States. By the time the Model T was withdrawn from production in 1927, its price had been reduced to $290 for the coupe. 15 million units had been sold, and mass personal automobility had become a reality. But the automotive industry had some growing pains. The number of active automobile manufacturers dropped from 253 in 1908 to only 44 by 1929, with about 80% of the industry's output accounted for by those Big Three companies, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. Nash, Hudson, Studebaker, and Packard were companies that hung on only to collapse in the post-World War II period. World War II and the automobile industry. The auto industry had played a critical role in producing military vehicles and war goods in the First World War. During World War II, in addition to turning out several million military vehicles, American automobile manufacturers made some 75 essential military items. Most of them were totally unrelated to the motor vehicle. These materials had a total value of $29 billion, 1/5 of the nation's war production. The U.S. auto industry certainly has a legacy. The automobile has been a key force for change in 20th century America. The automobile became the lifeblood of the petroleum industry, one of the biggest customers of the steel industry, and a chief consumer of many other industrial products. The automobile stimulated participation in outdoor recreation and spurred the growth of tourism and tourism-related industries such as service stations, roadside restaurants, and motels post-World War II. Fast forward to the 1960s. See if you remember this Chevrolet commercial.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. America's asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA. America's the greatest land of all. On a highway or a road along a levee, performance is sweeter, nothing can beat her. Life is completer in a Chevy. So make a date today to see the USA. See it in your Chevrolet.
Traveling east, traveling west, wherever you go, Chevy service is best. Southward or north, Near place or far, there's a Chevrolet dealer for your Chevrolet car.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. The Rockies way out west are calling you. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA, where fields of golden wheat pass and review. Whether traveling light or with a load that's heavy, performance is sweeter, nothing can beat her. Life is completer in a Chevy. So make a date today to see the USA and see your Chevrolet.
What about this commercial for the 1960 Oldsmobile? You remember this?
The 1960 Oldsmobile, sparkling new from every view, capturing the very spirit of the rocketing 60s. Now at your Oldsmobile quality dealers. Here's the most satisfying ride you've ever tried. Oldsmobile's new Quadra Balance ride. The smoothest, quietest going ever with Oldsmobile's exclusive wide-stand chassis, cushioned by new vibra-tuned body mountings and new nylon sleeve shock absorbers. There's a new balance of power, too, with 2 new rocket engines. A new premium rocket designed for super performance from premium fuel, standard on all Super 88 and 98 models. And now, for the first time, Rocket Go on regular gas. Yes, for 1960, a new regular rocket engine that runs on regular gas is standard equipment on every Dynamic 88. Oldsmobile for 1960, the most satisfying car you've ever known.
Or this one, an original commercial that aired for the 1960 Mercury.
It began one morning at 4 a.m. 13 Mercuries in a torture test. Each car drives 10,000 miles for 10 long nights and 10 long days. 130,000 miles that prove the quality of the 1960 Mercury. Start the run through Snake Pit Curve. Test for lean and sway and swerve. Check the handling, how she steers. Check the instruments like a Bombardier. Next, test the brakes, Mercury style. 9,000 stops in 10,000 miles. That's what we mean by Mercury quality. Keep 'em rolling round the clock. Test the wheels, test the shocks. Over 100 stumbling blocks. How smooth you glide on road-tuned wheels. You've just got to ride to see how it feels. Now, head her nose straight up to the sky. Up she goes, a half-mile high. Up and up like wild geese fly. 4,000 times they climb the hill to prove the power behind Mercury's grill. That's what we mean by Mercury quality. Finally, head west. Look at 'em roll. Safe, sure, under control. Into the saucer. Up on the lip. Mile after mile at a smooth, steady clip. That's what we mean by Mercury quality. The 1960 Mercury. Best built car in America. See it at Quality Headquarters. Your Mercury dealer.
We don't want to leave out Ford. There's a 1960 original Ford car commercial.
You are about to know the thrill of seeing that which has never been seen before. You are about to enter a beautiful, exciting, wonderful new world, the world of 1960. For the first time in history, you'll see not one, not two, but three completely new kinds of Ford cars for 1960. A wonderful new world of Fords. First, representing the 1960 Fords, the finest Fords of a lifetime, the magnificent new Galaxy.
Live a wondrous new life in the Fords of a lifetime. The finest new Fords of a lifetime. In a beautiful, wonderful new world of Fords.
Beautiful from any point of view, worth more from every point of value. The 1960 Fords open up a whole wonderful new world of styling, elegance, and built for people comfort. And now, the world's most wanted car.
Thunderbird, the finest of fine cars, the last word in wish it were mine cars, the dream car of the wonderful new world of Fords.
The 1960 Thunderbird. Finally, the car everyone's been waiting to see. The new size Ford, the Falcon.
The Falcon, the new size Ford Falcon, you'll find that the new size Ford Falcon's the easiest car in the wide world to own.
Here's full comfort for 6 adults in a car that'll give you up to 30 miles a gallon. A new size car with a new size price. It's the easiest car in the world to own. The Ford Falcon. You can see these cars at your Ford dealer showroom now. The Falcon, the Thunderbird, and 1960 Fords.
There's a big, wide, wonderful world of new Fords, newly proportioned for you, Fords. So beautiful, wonderful, beautiful, wonderful, beautiful, wonderful new world of Fords.
Hello, MountainCare. This is part 2 of Old Cars. In this presentation, we'll watch a video on the history of the American car, and we'll actually go roadside to a classic car show. This will be a long video, probably about an hour and a half. Just warning you.
Ever since Henry Ford started tinkering with engines and jumped into the lead of the nascent automobile industry at the end of the 19th century, America has been a major producer of motor vehicles. Sometimes the styling wasn't too subtle and the cars themselves were seldom small, but America took to the motor car more than any other nation, building impressive roads to cater for the vast numbers of machines which rolled off the assembly lines. The US embraced the motor car like a wheeled god, got behind the wheel, and soon it seemed that no one walked anywhere anymore. Personal mobility meant that people could be anywhere they wanted to be in just a few minutes, so they moved further away, and towns became sprawling conurbations across hundreds of square miles, and journeys became longer and longer. Vast tracts of land were given over to places to merely park cars, and more still to roads that linked all the places Americans would want to go. The country that gave us the shopping mall also gave us the parking lot and drive-through convenience. A whole new culture emerged, centered around the motor vehicle, and it seemed that just about anything could be done in a car, even dining out. Or going to the movies. Drive-in theatres became a major feature of American life, a rite of passage for newly independent teenage drivers and their dates. As the United States highway system began to develop in the 1920s, long-distance road journeys became more common, and the need for inexpensive overnight accommodation close to the main roads led to the growth of the motel, literally the motorist's hotel. About the time that Henry Ford was building his first cars, so too was Ransom Olds. Early cars looked like, and really were, horse-drawn carriages without the horse. General Motors bought Oldsmobile in 1908, and during its 107-year history, the company produced 35 million cars. When it was killed off by GM, Oldsmobile was the oldest surviving American automobile marque, and one of the oldest in the world after Daimler and Peugeot. But it is Henry Ford that the world knows as the father of US motoring. In his older years, he'd get out a reproduction of his first car, the quadricycle, and drive his wife Clara around their estate, Fair Lane. Ford's impact was felt not just in creating motor cars, but in economics, production, management and engineering. He worked out that the more cars he built, the cheaper he could sell each one, and thus was born the economy of scale. The price of Ford's Model T dropped every year as more and more were built. By 1918, half of all the cars in America were Model Ts. Henry Ford was a pioneer of welfare capitalism. He needed to reduce a high turnover of workers, and efficiency meant hiring and keeping the best people. So, Ford announced a $5 per day program in 1914, more than doubling the minimum daily pay for qualifying workers. Ford claimed that with this voluntary change, labour turnover in his plants went from huge to so small that he simply stopped bothering to measure it. When Ford started paying $5 a day, and also a 40-hour working week, he was criticised by other industrialists and by Wall Street. But he proved that paying people more would enable Ford workers to afford the cars they were producing, and it was good for the economy. By bringing the parts together on a moving assembly line and by simplifying the work so that he didn't need to find skilled craftsmen, Ford was able to build hundreds of cars a day. The production line and mass production soon became common expressions, and their influence would forever change almost every industry on Earth. A Sunday afternoon drive with the family became a national pastime. For some families, it became a ritual, a habit. It was possible to travel quite large distances to visit family and friends, even if actually getting going took quite a while. And sometimes the roads weren't too good either. The sheer volume of traffic in the early days meant that many existing roads became impassable almost as soon as it began to rain. Local, state and federal governments were forced to invest heavily in building a road network capable of handling the sudden rush of cars, a never-ending task that seems destined to last as long as cars are still being driven. Bigger vehicles just made it worse, even if they were employed in the construction process itself. The First World War was the first major conflict where petrol-powered vehicles had played a significant part. And in return, the development of vehicles such as the truck were greatly accelerated once their usefulness was apparent. Bigger and more complex road-building machines were designed that did the work of 10 or even 100 men. Hard surface roads were developed, roads that wouldn't get chopped up into muddy quagmires in the rain and wouldn't become rock-hard and dusty in the heat of summer. Various systems have been developed over centuries to reduce washaways, bogging and dust in cities, including cobblestones and even wooden paving. Tar-bound macadam was applied to roads towards the end of the 19th century in cities like Paris. Tarmac was patented by Edgar Purnell Hooley in 1901 and is a mix of tar and aggregate like granite chips, compacted with a road roller. Adding small amounts of Portland cement, resin and pitch modified the tar. Other roads were made with concrete, but as speeds rose, some surfaces offered better grip when wet or dry than others, while extremes of temperatures made some melt or crack. As oil production increased, a byproduct called asphalt became available in quantity and replaced tar, thanks to its reduced sensitivity to temperature. Roads joined villages, towns and cities in all directions right across America. The motor car, and specifically the Model T Ford, wasn't only about personal mobility. It brought home the shopping, carried the doctor on house calls, and a whole new industry of mechanics, services, garages, petrol and oil supplies grew up to provide the vital provisions needed by the car. For the first time, Americans were able to travel more than a few miles from home inexpensively. They were able to roam and explore their own country in their own cars. They were able to visit the great national parks, set aside for the people, but which few people have been able to reach or explore. The weekend getaway, shooting, fishing and hunting, or just a day trip into the countryside with the family became not just a possibility, but a reality. And the vehicle used for these idyllic moments was, inevitably, a Model T Ford. People made jokes about them, but in the 19 years it was in production, over 15 million Tin Lizzies were built, a record it would take the Volkswagen Beetle 27 years to beat, 45 years later. Another famous American brand name to see 3 centuries is Buick, who built a closed car years before Ford. Buick was the mainstay of what would become General Motors. Despite its history and technical superiority of a century ago, Buick was nearly killed off in the disastrous first decade of the 21st century. But of course the motor car has had a pivotal role from the very start in that other favourite of the American public, the motion picture. By 1927, the Model T had reached the end of its development and more sophisticated cars were needed, so Henry Ford himself commissioned the very first of the new Model A. Unlike the Model T, which was only available in black, the Model A was sold in 4 colours, but not black. And although it was only in production for a little over 4 years, nearly 5 million Model A's were built. Ford wasn't only a visionary engineer and a businessman. He also had a keen eye for promotion, and over the years, he made a point of marking his company's milestones, invariably with a replica quadricycle on hand too. Sadly, the original quadricycle, the very first Ford, had to be sold to finance what came later, and it was lost in the roadworks of history. But it was this car, the Ford Model 18, but usually called simply the Ford V8, which would come to define American motoring. Variations on the 8-cylinder engine would become almost universal across the US motor industry. The big rumbling engines would become the basis for generations of cars, millions of vehicles, and a national obsession with what would become known as muscle cars. Mr. Ford was on hand as the 1 millionth and 3 millionth V8 rolled out the factory door. LaSalle was a very different automobile brand. It wasn't built from scratch by a visionary engineer, but was created to fill a gap in the market by General Motors CEO Alfred P. Sloan. A LaSalle could handle rough road, but was intended to be a luxurious car. Sloan put the company's nameplates into price order. Chevrolet was the entry-level brand, and next came Oakland, Oldsmobile, Buick, and Cadillac. Cadillac prices soared in the 1920s, and the LaSalle was intended to fill the gap that existed between it and Buick. A mediocre seller, the name vanished just 13 years later. Similarly, Ford produced the Lincoln as an upmarket brand for wealthy people who wouldn't be seen in anything as common as a Ford. This was luxury, for the passengers at least, for by now professional drivers, chauffeurs, could be hired to deal with the increasingly heavy traffic, but often they worked in a small, cramped and Spartan cabin, while their passengers enjoyed every luxurious feature of the age. Soon, Ford's dream of a car in every driveway in every town and city was coming true. This advert goes even further than that.
Proud of you.
This is a great day for me, having my daughter graduate an honor student.
Oh, Daddy.
Oh, Ellen, just a moment. Look over here. Well, how do you like it?
You don't mean, Daddy, that it's really mine?
It's all yours, and here are the keys.
Oh, Daddy. Come on, girls, let's go for a ride. Here, Mother. Oh, a new Ford. And what a lovely color. And such a roomy seat.
And now, Ellen, you also have the key to style leadership.
Get the feel of V8 performance. See your nearest Ford dealer for a ride in the quality car in the low price field.
Not to be outdone, GM's creative marketing people were busy too.
It appears that everybody's ready. And into the spacious luggage compartment with the bags. Careful, that's Grandma's present. Get in, Rex, you're going too. And their 1940 Chevrolet will get them to their destination easily, safely, and with the utmost economy. Solid comfort. And that also describes Chevrolet for 1940. With its bigger and roomier body by Fisher and perfected knee-action riding system, the Ride Royal, one of Chevrolet's 175 important modern features. Reasons why Chevrolet's first again.
That same year, 1940, while much of the rest of the world was in the grips of the Second World War, America was celebrating its take on the World Fair at Flushing Meadows in New York. It was the first exposition to be based on the future, with an opening slogan of "Dawn of a New Day," and it allowed over 44 million visitors to take a look at the world of tomorrow. Not surprisingly, transport was a big part of both what the fair was and did. It covered 5 square kilometers, and new vehicles were both a big drawcard for visitors and a headache for organizers. The Ford building, covering nearly 30,000 square meters, was just one of the places where the US motor industry was showcased. Inside, visitors were exposed to the evolution of the car from its infancy to the then present day. At the time, less than 4 decades in Ford's case.
The main entrance hall is a symphony in color and a fascinating introduction to what follows. Here is a panorama of the motor car age, starting with the first Ford car, built in 1903, and coming down to the present Ford, the Lux Ford, Mercury, Lincoln Zephyr, and Lincoln, style leaders for the road of tomorrow.
The centerpiece was Ford's cycle of production, a 30-meter turntable weighing over 150 tons and floating in over 70,000 liters of water, It used animated models to reveal how the car industry spreads employment across many sectors of society and into areas far removed from the actual car-making factories.
The automobile industry spreads employment back through its suppliers, back to the raw materials.
Once out of the exhibition hall, visitors were invited to ride on what was dubbed the Road of Tomorrow. We would call them flyovers and take them for granted. General Motors was a conglomeration of car brands. Started in 1908, it would become the world's largest corporation and was the highest-selling car maker in the world for 77 consecutive years, from 1931 to 2008, when it lost this epithet to Toyota. Through the years, GM has produced cars called Cadillac, Elmore, Oakland, Buick, Chevrolet, Daewoo, GMC, Holden, Hummer, Oldsmobile, Opel, Pontiac, Saab, Saturn, and Vauxhall. At its peak, General Motors employed 350,000 people and operated 150 factories on 6 continents. The 1940 Hydromatic Oldsmobile saw another momentous step in the evolution of the automobile. It was the first mass-production car fitted with an automatic gearbox. Cadillac began working on a shiftless transmission in 1932, but Oldsmobile introduced the Hydromatic because it produced more cars than Cadillac at the time, and to protect Cadillac's reputation if the market rejected the new transmission. Once the US had committed to the Second World War, many industries were switched to manufacturing not just weapons, but the planes, trucks and ships needed by a modern fighting force. The US built over 150,000 battle tanks, 250,000 cannons, over 2.5 million machine guns, and 2.25 million military trucks. The war, just as in the First World War, prompted engineering advances at a much greater rate than in peacetime. Also, developments in mass production that came directly from the motor industry were applied to the munitions factories, and much of industrialized America became a war machine making war machines. The US also built over 300,000 military aircraft, and Henry Ford's magic was at work here too. The B-24 Liberator heavy bomber was the most produced American aircraft in history, with over 18,000 built. Ford opened Willow Run, the world's largest factory outside the USSR, in August 1942. There, on the biggest assembly line in the world, 428 B-24s a month were built. The Army asked 135 companies for working prototypes of a four-wheel drive reconnaissance car, setting a deadline of just 49 days. Working without pay, freelance designer Carl Probst drew up plans for the Bantam prototype in 2 days, estimated the total cost of the vehicle, and submitted a bid in 5 days, complete with blueprints. The Army chose Overland Willys, with Ford as the second supplier, to build what became known as the Jeep. After the war, thousands of Army surplus vehicles were spread all over the world, and on weekends, groups of US Jeep fans took their hardy little vehicles out into the wilderness. These weekend warriors became rampaging ridge runners, keen to put their Jeeps and themselves to the test in some pretty tough terrain. With none of the safety gear of today's cars, the hardy passengers risked being flicked out, not only from their seats, but right out of the vehicles. And when things got hot, a cooling-off period didn't mean a seat on the sidelines, but a seat in the middle of the action. Wet or muddy, it didn't matter.
With a posse on Jeep back skidding off to the old cry, they went that-a-way.
Post-war reconstruction was harsh, but by the 1950s, people were looking to a bright new future, and the car industry responded in kind. New factories and new workers churned out new cars that just seemed to get bigger and bigger. About this time, American cars became irrelevant to the rest of the world, and vice versa. They were too big for many European cities and roads, and their styling was too brash for countries still recovering from the debilitating effects of World War II. In Detroit, no one seemed to care. They were hard at work fulfilling local demand. In the 1950s, the area had the highest median income and the highest rate of home ownership of any major US city. 4 out of every 5 cars in the world was made in the US, half of them by GM. No other car companies had the capital or the know-how to enter the global car business. GM's main US rival, Ford, was half its size. The largest foreign car maker, Volkswagen, was little bigger than GM's own German subsidiary, Opel, and only had one model, the Beetle. And Toyota wasn't even on the horizon. It made 23,000 cars in 1955 in Japan, compared to 4 million manufactured by GM in the US. But the volumes of cars being built and sold meant that despite millions spent on upgrading the roads, traffic jams started slowing down average speeds for routine journeys. America's solution was ever more, ever bigger roads, cutting across the countryside like fat black snakes, linking homes and offices, schools, shops and factories. Divided roads with 4 or more lanes in each direction, once considered more than sufficient, encouraged more travellers, and within a handful of years would become clogged to a virtual standstill. Big new roads did mean that people in outlying areas could more easily travel to find work. Rural dwellers could now work in industry as well as on the land their forefathers had farmed. Farmers, once isolated from their markets, could now drive there easily, saving valuable daylight hours. Better transport meant school children could attend schools further away from home than their parents and grandparents did. Rural one-room schoolhouses and single teachers were replaced by big modern schools with teams of specialist teachers. This meant greater challenges for growing minds, and the teachers, but better resources too. Out-of-town residents also found that owning a car meant being able to get to another American invention that probably wouldn't have happened without the motor car, the shopping mall. With lots of retail outlets all in one convenient place and with convenient access and parking right outside, a whole new method of shopping evolved and spelled the death knell for older retail outlets. Away from the rush of changes bought and wrought by the automobile, an annual car show was staged by General Motors. From 1949 to 1961, Motorama tried to boost sales with displays of prototypes, concept cars and other special models. Here are some of the Motorama vehicles, all of which were complete and running handmade cars that have survived over half a century to the present day. The Buick XP300 was a design exercise from 1951, and the name came from its experimental status and the 300 horsepower delivered by its supercharged V8 engine, which took the car to over 220 kilometers an hour. Looking half a century ahead of its time, the Buick ran on methanol, had a heat-treated aluminium body, push-button seat adjustment, electric windows, and power jacks. The 1951 LeSabre showcased very advanced ideas. Made of aluminium and magnesium, it had a modern automatic gearbox, a rain-activated self-raising roof, a dual-fuel, supercharged fuel-injected V8 engine, and built-in hydraulic jacks. Rumoured to have cost as much as $1 million, equal to 10 times that today, it was used as a personal car for years by GM's head of design, Harley Earl. GM's experimental turbine engines went into a needle-nosed, fiberglass-reinforced plastic delta-winged vehicle, the Firebird 1. 4 years later, in 1956, the more refined four-passenger Firebird 2 appeared, using the first regenerative gas turbine, which allowed the use of air conditioning and power steering. Firebird 3 was built in 1958. A two-passenger turbine car, it had a single joystick controller replacing the steering wheel and pedals. The Buick Centurion appeared at the 1956 Motorama. Its bodywork was made of fiberglass and its cabin was inspired by an aircraft. The bubble roof was more stylish than it was practical, but the swooping rear fins would appear on production cars 3 years later. A 325 horsepower V8 engine was fitted, and decades ahead of its time, a television camera reported on what was behind the car to a small TV screen in the dash. When the doors were opened, the seats slid backwards automatically to give better access to the red leather and brushed metal interior. The Buick Skylark was made in 6 production runs. Each design varied due to changing technology and tastes. Introduced to mark Buick's 50th anniversary, the Skylark was one of 3 special convertibles produced in 1953. Of the 3, the Skylark had the biggest production, with 1,690 units. Design chief Harley Earl convinced GM they needed a 2-seater sports car because returning soldiers were bringing home MGs, Jaguars and Alfa Romeos. With his special projects crew, Earl began Project Opal in 1951. The result was the hand-built EX-122 Corvette prototype, first shown at the 1953 Motorama at the Waldorf Astoria in New York. Production began 6 months later, with both a heater and a radio as extra cost options. The Corvette was rushed into production to capitalize on the enthusiastic public reaction to the concept car, but it was underpowered and the project was almost cancelled. The 6-cylinder engine and 2-speed auto gearbox won few friends. The concept car was used as a test mule for the V8 engine that was fitted in 1955. It is now in a museum in Atlantic City. In contrast, the volume-selling cars were a little more ordinary.
Getting there is a real treat when you drive Chevrolet, the best-looking, best-driving car on the road. Try a handsome new, gleaming new 9-passenger Beauville. For shopping, for hauling a full load of kids to a picnic, you name it, the Beauville fills the bill. Or step into a Bel Air Sport Coupe, long, low, distinctive. Truly Chevrolet in design and performance. You'll like Chevy's Get Up and Go, as exciting to drive as it is appealing to the eye. And how easily the new Chevrolet handles a little lady, a big station wagon. How nicely it corners on a bumpy road.
Cadillac's identity as an American automotive icon was unmistakable by 1957. The cars celebrated the good life with voluptuous styling and vast chrome trims, backed up with some real engineering creativity. Reaching into the luxury stratosphere was the 1957 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham, costing $13,074. One of the most interesting Cadillacs of the 1950s, this low-slung, pillarless sedan featured center-opening doors and a roof capped in brushed stainless steel, one of Harley Earl's favorite touches, while standard quad headlights were an industry first. The 57 Chevy was available in 3 models, the upscale Bel Air, the mid-range 210 and the 150 in 2-door, station wagon and convertible bodies. The car's image is often used in toys, graphics, music, movies and television as typical of 1950s American cars. For 57, Chevrolet dictated a series of changes that increased the cost of the car. These included a new dashboard and air ducts in the headlight pods, which resulted in the distinctive chrome headlights that helped make the 57 Chevy a classic. 14-inch wheels gave the car a lower stance, and a wide grille made it look wider from the front. The famous 57 Chevy tail fins duplicated the wide look from the rear. The Chevrolet Impala became the best-selling car in the United States when big models dominated the market, competing against Ford's Galaxie 500 and the Plymouth Fury. The Impala was introduced in 1958 as a new, upmarket, sporty trim package created for Bel Air coupes and convertibles. Unique to the model were its 6 tail lights, which set it apart from cheaper models. This classic styling would become its trademark. From 1958 to 65, it was Chevrolet's most expensive passenger model. The Cadillac Eldorado was part of the Cadillac line from 1953 to 2002, the longest-running American luxury car range. Eldorado models were always near the top of the Cadillac lineup and were among the most extravagantly styled vehicles of their day. The Eldorado had its own rear-end styling with high, slender, pointed tail fins. These contrasted with the thick bulbous fins common at the time, an example of Eldorado pointing the way forward. It was a four-door hardtop with rear-hinged rear doors that cost more than the Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud of the same year. It featured air suspension, the first memory power seats, and even small bottles of perfume. The convertibles were the vehicle of choice for celebrities, movie stars, and the beautiful people of the 1950s. By 1960, the American automobile industry had consolidated into the Big Three: General Motors, Ford and Chrysler, and American Motors. These firms not only dominated the domestic market, they were supreme globally.
So we'll leave off there and go to a classic car show and see what some of those cars from the 50s and 60s look like today.
Welcome to the Riverside Show and Go.
Some of that stuff, yeah, we're great. You fired up, but you had the cold on when you had left. But this one I was going, I had points. from Street Machine National. Having fun? Oh yeah.
Pretty cool to see the cars come off of the production line during the time that they were made. Here we are, several decades later. See how people have enjoyed them and are still enjoying them. Let's enjoy a look at American cars, history of American cars.